Say what's cracking, YouTube? It's your boy 16 to life, and I'm back like I'm on a parole violation. You're down. Now, for those of y'all that's new to my page, in 1994, I got arrested. I was eventually sentenced to 16 years plus life, and I served 24 years straight in the California prison system. During those times, I accumulated some good stories. I'm going to share one with y'all today. If you happen to like the story, be sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and most importantly, hit that notification bell. That way, anytime I drop a story, you'll be notified ASAP, and you can hop on it whenever you're ready. Also, man, I rap. Do not get it twisted. My flow is nothing like Curtis Blow. Go to my YouTube playlist, scroll down to gas stations, and you will find a lot of my songs there. I also have a song called Never Gave Me Therapy. It's on all major streaming sites. Be sure to check your boy out. I got some videos on my page. Go from here. Couple videos, man. Check your boy out. I'm from Bannon. You're definitely going to be impressed, man. Now, let's get into this story. Now, for many years, I've been, thinking about this right here, and I'm going to call this the House of Misfortune. And so the story is basically about how it was a house in my neighborhood, a couple of doors down from where I grew up. And it seemed like every family that moved into that house, it was 3 consecutive families, suffered some type of tragedy in some shape or form. And so my mom has been living in that house for quite some time, in the house that she's in, And so I probably have been there since I was about 4 or 5 years old. The first people who I can remember living in that particular house was a couple of friends of mine, and probably the only 2 people who I'll call by their real names was Norman and Byron. They were brothers, Norman, eventually we started calling him Biscuit. And so Norman was maybe about 4 or 5 years older than I was, and his brother Byron was a year older than I was. Also, my father, later when him and my mother divorced, he bought a house that was probably about, I would say, maybe about 5 minutes away from my mother. Just so happened, Norman and Byron, their grandmother lived maybe about 4 houses down from my father. So a lot of times when I would be over at my father's, Norman and Byron would be at their grandmother's, and so we would see each other quite often. I remember one time I was at my father's, and Norman and Byron, they were at their grandmother's, and we were in his grandmother's backyard playing baseball. And I went out to tag Norman. He was running home and ran through my arm and broke my arm. I was about 6 or 7 years old. So I say all that to say I've been knowing these guys for a long time. Norman being about 4 or 5 years older than I was, he hopped in the street before I did, and so when you're 13 or 12, 10, 4 or 5 years is a big difference, because you're hanging in different age groups. And so by the time I started hanging in the streets, 14, 15 years old, he was already well in the streets selling dope and going back and forth to prison and stuff. And so I started going to Billings, Montana, selling dope and this and that. So I was out there a couple of years. I come back down to Bannon to visit or whatever. I remember seeing Biscuit. Biscuit was out there riding around, selling dope, doing his thing. And he had happened to move into a house that happened to be next door to the neighborhood park where we hung out, sold drugs. Biscuit was also selling drugs at that time and started selling drugs in that house, And so I remember, talking to him and stuff. I hadn't seen him in a while. And at some point in time, during my visit in Banning, I told him, that I had a dream that his house had got raided, and just to be careful, So I ended up going back to Montana. Maybe about a month or 2 later, his house ended up getting raided, and he ended up going to jail. And that was like the last time I seen him, probably in 1991, 92, somewhere around there. The next time I ran across him was 1998. In Ironwood State Prison. I'm walking around the track, and I happened to bump into him, and we both have life sentences. He ended up getting a life sentence due to the 3 strikes law in California. Now, when the 3 strikes law was created, initially, I believe it was created with the intended purpose for everyone who had 2 violent felonies, and when they caught a 3rd violent felony, they would be sentenced to 25 years to life. Some type of way, the law didn't quite come out like that, so it ended up with, if you had 2 violent felonies, your next crime, regardless whether it was a misdemeanor or a felony, you could receive 25 years to life for it. And so I knew several people in prison with 35 to life, 25 to life for things like stealing underwear, stealing candy, receiving stolen property, possession of drugs. I believe my homie Biscuit that got caught with a couple of cocaine, a couple of rocks of cocaine, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life. He ended up doing about 14 years before that law was finally overturned for those who had misdemeanors, and he was released from prison. The next family, though, that happened to move in that house, I believe they probably moved in maybe about 83, 84 during my junior high school years, was a family they had. It was an older girl who was a year younger than I was. Then she had a brother that was a couple of years younger than she was, and then it was two more sisters. And so by them moving in around the age of me being 13, 14 or whatever, he also had a cousin that was his age that would come over and visit often and sometimes live with them as well. And so, we would go outside, we'd play, go swimming together, go down to the park, play, rifleman or whatever, army, all that old type of stuff. So we actually became quite close, Later on, at some point, they end up moving, but they still lived in the same town. And of course, I would see them all the time at school and stuff like that. Well, right after the girl graduated, I believe was in 1990. And she was a real smart, very pretty young lady, cheerleading. I believe she was a straight A student, straight A's and B's maybe, but she definitely was very smart. On her way to college, she happened to attend a house party in Bannon, and a shootout ensued. With one of my classmates, a guy who was a year older than me, and some guys from out of town. In the course of, so he's shooting this way, the guy that way is shooting back, and in the course of this shootout, the older sister gets hit. I believe she was struck in the side, and she died, at the age of 18, with her whole life in front of her. Maybe a year or two later, a couple of years later, her younger brother, who was immediately under her in age, he also was convicted and given 25 years to life, maybe more than that. But I know he ended up getting a life sentence on a separate, unrelated murder. And so the next family that moved into the house after them, actually it was 5 of them. The 2 girls were the oldest. I believe they were maybe 6 or 7 years older than me. Then they had a brother who was probably about maybe 4 or 5 years younger than me. Then it was another sister who was my same age, a schoolmate of mine, classmate of mine, then another brother that was maybe about 5 or 6 younger than her. And so the older brother, from the time they moved there, which was probably maybe, I want to say maybe about 87, 86, somewhere around my high school years, he was always in the streets, already a gang member and stuff, with the business, always out there fighting, shooting, stuff like that. I would see him in the hood. And in my eyes, this dude was, he was kind of not really crazy, but just really with the business. He would go to jail, and I kid you not, on the same day, he would go to, when I say jail, I'm talking about prison. He would go to prison. On the same day that he'd get out, he'd be in a stolen car, gun in his lap, cocaine in his hand for sale. I was like, man, this dude is crazy. He just don't care, Eventually, once I started hanging in the streets more, I started hanging out with him and stuff. I kind of feel he showed me some things in the street, and he definitely was with the business. We was locked up in the county jail together. He was in the county jail. Beep, beep, boop, bop, beep, boom. He was taking fades, whooping on dudes. He really was pressing a cold line. I mean, this dude was a real gangbanger, if you was from the wrong hood, you was going to have to fight. If you come up in the crip tank that we was in and not have the right answers, didn't know certain people, he was going to get rolled up. He stayed pressing a line, testing people's heart. This dude was really, really with the business, Eventually, he was charged with 2 murders, and he ended up receiving the death penalty. When I left and was sent to prison in 96, I believe it was, he still was in a county jail fighting his case. And like I said, eventually he was found guilty and given the death penalty. I've talked to him several times since I've been home, and he's still upbeat, in a good mood. He has stepped away from the gang life and took his life in another path. He's always been a very intelligent dude, man. Just like a lot of us, he was just misfocused, put his energy into the wrong thing, But he's still upbeat. Every time I spoke to him, still laughing, clowning, and, he's, like I said, he's always been a real cat, a real gangster's gangster, with the business, You know, like I said, I've seen him in shootouts, fighting all the time, pressing the line. You know, he was a real, as they say nowadays, he was a real stepper, you know, and a lot of dudes was fearful of him, and, you know, he earned a lot of respect, you know. So I held him in high self-esteem. Like I say, never told on anybody, none of that stuff. So I'm talking to him one day on the phone, you know, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, he just say, you know, man, I ain't built for this stuff, man. I'm like, what you talking about? He said, man, just, you know, I ain't built for this, man. And so what he was talking about was being on death row. You know, at the time we spoke, he probably had been in jail maybe about 27, 28 years old. But imagine just being on death row, you know, void of any female contact, for the most part, human contact also, you know, good food, just, you know, just living like that. So, you know, regardless of how gangster he was, how solid he kept it in terms of the street code, and not you know, not doing anything foul, you know, always sticking to his codes and morals in the streets, he come to the realization that that life wasn't worth living. And, you know, I mean, and who is built for that? You know, and I mentioned him in a story a couple of times. You know, who is built for being away from your loved ones, you know, your family, you know, watching your parents pass away while you were in prison, you know, just eating the same old food, stuck in the same cell, you know, for years upon years upon years, you know. And so, yeah, that was a, you know, sad situation. And also his, like I told you guys, he had a sister who was a couple of years under him, and we were in the same grade. We were schoolmates, real good friends. I took her out to Montana with me a couple of times. She was also, you know, hustling and stuff. Now she's doing real good in life, so I don't want to mention her name. But, you know, she had a boyfriend who was also a schoolmate of mine, a year older than I was. I knew him all my life, and he was the one who was involved in the shootout with the guy from out of town that killed the young lady who had previously lived in the house before she did. So he was eventually charged, not with her murder, but in an act that led to her murder, you know, the shootout with the other individual. And I believe he ended up getting I forget exactly how much time he got, but he served about 18 years straight, you know. Served about 18 years straight, and for that shooting that led to the death of the girl who lived in the house before him, which was a bit ironic. He ended up also having a baby with my homegirl. And later on, when I was in prison, I come to find out that the baby that they had, of course, he had grew up around the age of 15, 16. He ended up himself being charged with murder. And I just really thought that was kind of deep, right? Because like I said, he grew up, you know, seeing me, seeing his father, his uncle, you know, all of us go to prison. He also had another uncle who ended up getting life without parole. So he had one uncle that got the death penalty. His father ended up getting a long time in prison, done about 18 years. Then he had another uncle that got life without parole that's still in prison right now, you know. And then, like I said, me and him was always close. Me and his mother was good friends. I would always visit their house. Later on, they end up moving, but his mom, their mom, and my mom stayed good friends, you know. So when I'd come down from Montana, I'd go over there, visit them and stuff, you know. He reminds me of a whole lot of stuff that I don't even remember. I'd come through there, give him money and all that old type of stuff. But like I said, later on, he ended up himself being charged with murder around the age of 16, 17, somewhere around that age. And which was really surprising because, like I said, his mother was kind of no nonsense when it came to him, you know. And so I was just shocked to hear that. I thought that, you know, he would go a different route, wouldn't get caught up in the streets or whatever. Every time I would talk to him, I'd call, you know, he was real intelligent and things like that. So it was just shocking to finally, you know, learn that he had fell into the streets and been charged with murder himself. He ended up doing probably about, maybe about 15 years, 16 years. I think they ended up dropping the case down to a voluntary manslaughter, and he's home now, you know. Actually, his father, myself, and him, we all ended up having the same lawyer. You know, we paid lawyer by the name of Grover Porter, about a San Bernardino black guy. I don't know if he's still alive or whatever, but you know, it was just, for me, it was just a trip how it seemed like all these families who lived in that house, you know, suffer some form of tragic misfortune, you know, and I would think about that often. You know, I don't know if the house was cursed, or people who lived in the house just made bad choices or whatever. You know, later on, I ended up bumping into the second family, the son of the second family, who was charged with an unrelated murder to his sister. You know, to his sister's death. His murder was unrelated to that death. I ended up running across him in several prisons as well. And when I paroled from CMC West, he was there on the yard. Actually, we was in the same building. And so I left him a lot of my property and stuff, you know, a lot of my food, fan, my belongings and stuff like that. And so we would walk out there on the track before I got paroled, because we was together maybe about a year and a half, you know, and just reminisce. It's always cool to be in jail with somebody that you know from the streets, you know. And, you know, we'd reminisce, talk about, you know, old people, old homies, old classmates, you know, do you remember when this happened? Do you remember when that happened, and stuff like that? And, you know, unfortunately for him, he's still in prison right now. I believe he's probably been incarcerated probably about, I would like to say, maybe about 27, 28 years now, you know. So who knows if he'll ever come home. He has 25 years of life, and so, you know, he's steady trying to come home, but every time he goes to the board, they're denying him. But anyway, that's something that's always been on my mind for the longest, you know, even before I started doing YouTube. Even probably when I was in prison, I would just periodically think of how everybody who lived in that house, you know, at some point in time suffered some type of tragic, you know, some tragic, unfortunate incident. But anyway, yeah, I just thought I'd share that with you guys. You know, you already know what it is. It's your boy 16 to life. Resume normal program.